So let's talk about HTML5. We already saw how to use HTML when we went through the assignment number 1. So a lot of this hopefully will just be a review, but I wanted to formally cover the topic. So hypertext, HTML stands for hypertext markup language, and it's a derivative of the XML language. XML, the extensible markup language, was meant for being able to grab some raw data, some raw text data or numeric data, and then add some context and be able to mark up and say what specific thing the data meant, right? Whatever that data was, right? And the idea was that if we had whatever information we have, if somebody gives you just a string of 10 numbers, all by itself, it doesn't mean anything, right? The 10 numbers doesn't, unless I give you a context on how to interpret that piece of information, the information means nothing, right? If somebody tells you that those 10 digits, it's a phone number, then you know that now I can actually dial it, right? But if somebody instead tells you no, it's not a phone, right? It's a bank account, right? Then I can transfer, I can deposit, I can withdraw. So the meaning of the raw text only has meaning when you give the context. So XML was invented for that, right? To take some raw data that us as human beings with human intelligence and vision, we might know what the context is, right? If I see some text and some two numbers and a couple things, I might say, oh, it's an address. Yes, and even though artificial intelligence is getting there, XML was the solution at that time, right? We can give you context of what each piece of information is. So Tim Berners-Lee took this idea of the XML and came up with a particular vocabulary, a particular language. A language is basically just a set of accepted syntax, accepted tokens, and came up with this hypertext markup language, which is basically adding context to so that a browser could interpret how to render things, right? So we have H1s and paragraphs and lists and tables, right? So all these tags tell the browser how to render what would otherwise be just raw text. Yes. So the markup language comes from that. The hypertext meant that presumably this text was not just dead text, right? That it could interact, right? You could have some actions associated with either clicking with buttons or some text that you can click and then navigate somewhere else, right? So there was kind of interactive, right? And so this became very, very popular, allowed you to link up different pages. Now early on, it was very common to use quite a few of some of these markup tags, right? The opening tag and the closing tag over here, that establish the look and feel of the content. For instance, B made this text to be bold. Yes, we have since abandoned the use of the hypertext to establish the look and feel of the content. Instead, today we prefer to use CSS as a means of establishing the look and feel. But it was very, very common to use, bold, B for bold, italic, underscore, underlined, things like that, right? Even color, whether it was centered, whether it was justified left or right. Today, these tags are still there, but usually they're considered to be bad practice to use that. Instead, we prefer to use CSS as a better solution. Other than if you didn't have those tags, it would be just plain text, right? These documents are still implemented as just plain old ASCII files, right? That anybody can open up and edit with just a plain old text editor. Creating an HTML page is easy. It's just a text file. You give it the right extension .html and you're done, right? You can open it up with the browser. Browsers will interpret it as HTML and render it for you, interpreting all those tags. Now we call this an element, an HTML element. That's the B HTML element or the bold element. And the way you implement an element is that you have an opening tag and you have a closing tag. And the difference between the opening and closing is that they have the same name. We said that this tag has the name B. It's the name of the tag, and the closing one has just a slash at the end. Also, the content between the opening and closing, we call that the body of the element. So the opening tag, the closing tag, and the body. Some elements don't have a body, right? And we'll see that the how do you create one of those in a minute. We can have comments, right? So that they're useful for us to leave a comment for us to come back and remember what is that we were doing. And it's the opening, less than, bang, dash, dash allows you to have either one single line or multiple lines. So it's useful for us to know for reminding us certain things. We already looked at the syntax and how is it that you build an HTML page. We went through this last time, right? We have the document type. Then we have the root HTML element. Notice that the opening and closing. The body of the HTML element has two children. You have the head and the body. And then the head can have additional children such as the title, link, meta, all sorts of things can be in there. The style element would go here as well. But the actual content, right, lives in the body. This is what the browser will render, right? Whereas we leave things in the head for things such as meta information, the author, when it was created, other dependencies with other documents will be listed there as well. So we went through this already. So this should be all review for you. So here's pointing out that that the content of what's in the body, in the body, the white space is ignored by browsers, right? Even though we went through the trouble of adding extra white spaces, right? Extra new lines between the hello, the first paragraph and the second paragraph. When we render this in the screen, the browser just ignores all our white spaces. Yes, it just renders everything from left to right, from top to bottom, right? Using a layout policy called the inline policy, right? Everything just flows, right, from left to right, and when there's not enough space, it just wraps and starts in the next line. If you resize the screen, you'll see everything just flows, right? It gets bigger. If it doesn't fit, it just flows down, and then when it gets bigger, and then gets skinny and expands all to the whole width of the page. Make sense? That policy is referred to as inline rendering, right? It's displaying from left to right, from top to bottom, and it wraps. Everybody good? Lots of elements, lots of HTML elements follow this policy. Just plain text follows this policy. Just characters that have no style use the inline policy. If we want to add actual vertical spacing, right, we need to override the inline policy and add other ways of rendering it. For instance, the P here, it's called the paragraph element. Allows you to grab some piece of content and say, I don't want you to be. I want to add now not only the inline, but I want to add also some vertical spacing, right? And so the paragraph, what it does is that it allows you to break up content and actually add vertical spacing that would not otherwise be there, right? So here we're grabbing this paragraph and this other paragraph. We are marking it, and that they should be in separate vertical spacing between the two and some spacing in between, right? We say that the paragraph adds an additional rendering policy referred to as the block display policy, right? Where we can grab some content, right? And within that element, the body of the element still behaves in inline, but that block of paragraph behaves as a block with everybody else, right? So for instance, these two paragraphs, what they do is that this laudatum ipsum does not follow right after this book, right? Instead, the paragraph takes up the entire width of the page and then adds vertical spacing in between, right? In effect, implementing the paragraph. Yeah. Other elements that we saw already that behave like this are headings, right? Headings as well are block elements, right? Any piece of text that you put in there, right? They will take up the entire width of the page, They will push everything down vertically, right? So it's to add some white space in between. And then they'll style it with large piece of text and bold content inside. Whatever's inside still behaves as inline, right? Meaning if my heading is so long that it doesn't fit in the page, it will wrap, right? The content inside of the heading will wrap, right? But everything else, right? Other headings, other paragraphs will be pushed vertically, right? Will be pushed to add more space vertically. Make sense, right? So yeah, so the default behaviors are those are the two most common uses of display rules, right? The inline and the block. And you need to know which elements render as inline and which render as block, right? We already saw two that are block, the P and the paragraph and the heading. They're both block elements. We also saw that there's several sizes of the heading, H1, H2, and so on and so forth, that are progressively smaller, right? For creating sections. We also take a look at the last week about lists, that we have ordered and unordered lists, and we saw examples of this using the headings for the different sections. This is an example of an ordered list. I think this is wrong. Unordered and ordered list is the same. Tables. Let's talk about tables.